Elly Young, welcome to the show. How are you this morning?
I'm well, Elliot. Thanks so much for having me.
Pleasure is truly mine. I'm excited to dive into our topic of conversation today. I have a feeling it's going to be a very, very interesting one for many people, to be completely honest. And before we do dive into the depths of this topic, can you give the listeners a little context about who you are and what it is that you do?
Sure. I am an alcohol-free life coach and a hormone balancing expert. I have a coaching company called Find Myself Free. I have a podcast, and I basically help women change their relationship to alcohol and then learn how to balance their hormones and start healing years of cellular damage.
Yeah, let's dive into that a little bit more. I always find that most people's journey towards what they specialize in, especially when it goes from being like a job to a calling, it always comes from a personal journey. So can you share a little bit more about your personal journey? Was it something that you experienced?
Yes, definitely. And it's definitely been a calling as well. I think a lot of people who get alcohol free tend to have this calling because their lives change so drastically and their health and their wellness and that of their families that they truly want to pay it forward. And so that's my purpose here, is truly to pay forward the gifts that living an alcohol-free life have given me. My journey started like most people's. It was pretty typical, my drinking journey. I started in high school and then, progressed to like the binge drinking of college. I was an athlete. I played Division I college soccer. So we definitely partied hard. And then it kind of naturally transitioned into adulthood where, happy hours after work. And where my drinking took a bit of a different turn from maybe the innocuous, like social drinking into more of a coping mechanism was when I had children. And the stress and anxiety of becoming a mother and kind of feeling like I wasn't doing it right. Like I said, I was an athlete. I was always a really good student, but becoming a mom, it was a completely different level of performance that was required of me. And then there's no finish line. There's no accolades at the end. It's just kind of a constant uphill learning battle. And I struggled, as most women do. And I was kind of given permission by society to use alcohol kind of as a crutch to get through that. It was conditioned into me. There was never a moment where someone said, "Hey, watch out for this. This can become something that you depend on and something that can destroy your mental health." We all thought it was helping us become better mothers and get through that part of our life. It was the reward. And where it really kind of became more problematic for me, and again, nobody ever told me to stop. I was still very a typical drinker in most eyes. But during the pandemic, when I had to homeschool my two boys at the time, and I really started to lean on alcohol as a coping mechanism. And I had a son who was struggling with ADHD, and it didn't really become apparent to us until we started homeschooling him. And it was a difficult moment for our family as a whole. And I really recognized that I couldn't get clear on how to best help him until I was clear. And my drinking was complicating that because I was mentally not well and I was internalizing a lot of his struggles as my own. Like I was failing him. And once I was able to finally cut out the alcohol, I was able to get him the help he needed. And the entire trajectory of my family's wellness improved with me being alcohol free after that.
It's a fascinating journey and one that has taken you to an amazing place as well. And the thing that I want to dig into particularly here is the fact that you, I assume, wouldn't have defined yourself as an alcoholic or anything along those lines because you would expect that type of transformation from someone who maybe would go out on these all-night benders and everything along those lines, but it doesn't sound like that was you at all. And you actually was one of the first people to mention the concept of gray area drinking that I've not heard of before. So can you define that concept and talk to me about what your lifestyle looked like maybe on a nightly basis? Because I think a lot of people are going to resonate with this more than potentially they might think.
Exactly. Yeah. Gray area drinking is probably the category most people fall into, right? The label alcoholic has kind of done us a bit of a disservice because one, there's no criteria or diagnosis, I would say, for defining an alcoholic. It's really a self-assessment. Like you have to decide, like, how much is this impacting my life? If you go to the doctor, they're just going to ask you, a series of questions and you determine how much it's affecting you. But everybody else falls into this gray area where, my nightly habits were like, I'm stressed out. I came home from work. I'm managing my 2 kids. I'm cooking dinner, and I would start drinking, and it would be like a glass of wine or a cocktail. And that would just kind of turn into like 2 and sometimes 3 at night. But I was never drunk. I was never slurring. I was never, blacking out with my family. It was just a progressive kind of coping mechanism, and something that I really look forward to at the end of the night to kind of manage what I thought was helping me manage my stress and anxiety. But I was waking up chronically sleep deprived. I was having anxiety in the middle of the night at 3 a.m., irrational anxiety of like random things you're worrying about with the kids that in the morning you're like, well, of course, this is the easy solution. But in the middle of the night, you don't have that. You're just panicking. You wake up panicking. And what I later learned was that was actually adrenaline and cortisol reacting in my body from the depressant effect of the alcohol. And so that's something I really start to help my clients understand here is the coping mechanism of alcohol that we think is helping to lower our stress and anxiety in the moment, to give us that break, is actually biochemically raising our cortisol, raising our anxiety and our stress in our bodies and to like a chronic level so that our baseline is now elevated. And that's why we wake up with anxiety. That's why even one night of drinking, you're still feeling it 3 days later biochemically in your body.
Yeah, and you add sleep deprivation on top of that, and then you've got a whole host of problems, right? If you've raised your cortisol, if you are then emotionally dysregulated, you struggle to handle your day-to-day stresses, like they're not going to get any better. And trust me, with a lack of sleep as well, even with the alcohol that's supposed to be, for a period of time, like distracting you from your problems in the evening until they rear their ugly heads in the middle of the night, like you mentioned at 3 a.m. The reality is that getting progressively worse because you're getting progressively worse at being able to handle them based on the dependency and also the sleep deprivation as well, right?
Exactly. And most women accept that level of anxiety or depression, sleep deprivation as kind of a normal state of motherhood. That we just are like, oh, I guess this is how it is, right? We're taught not to complain about it. You just have to get through it. And alcohol kind of becomes this permission to rest. And it's like, you deserve this at the end of the day because your life is hard as a mom. You're really working hard, but yet it was compounding all of the things about motherhood that are making it hard, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And how did you then remove that from your life? Because you mentioned it was a bit of a crutch. It was something you looked forward to, something that progressed through early adulthood in your teens as, like you said, it went from happy hour and obviously celebrating as a soccer player into the reward at the end of the night after maybe putting the kids to bed or even earlier than that, right? And it became something, and this is the challenge I have as a health and fitness coach, right? A lot of people believe that the food that they're giving themselves is the only thing that they have to look forward to, the only thing they enjoy. And also, in some cases, you might have thought the alcohol is the only thing that allowed you to manage those evenings as well. So once you take away something that gives you such quote unquote joy and actually gives you strength to manage the evening, what are you left with? How did you remove that without thinking, okay, well, if I take this out, what's going to happen?
Yeah, I think that's a big fear most people go through when they're confronting their relationship with alcohol because they believe on a subconscious level that this is the reward, right? And so this takes work, but it's a different type of work than most people would assume. Like we've all tried to take breaks from alcohol. We've all tried to do the cleanses or the, dry January or sober October because we recognize most people are after it for the superficial benefits. Like I want to lose weight. And to be honest, when I first started, I was definitely like, I was coming out of the holiday season. I attempted a dry January because I was just feeling pickled, overweight, bloated from the holidays. But I knew deep down that this was a struggle. And so I was relying on willpower. And willpower, we all know, is like a finite muscle. And what goes on is that when you have this conscious desire to take a break from alcohol for whatever reason it is, your subconscious desire is much bigger and stronger. And it is all of those conditioned subconscious beliefs that are telling you, you need alcohol to relax. You need alcohol to connect and fit in socially. You need alcohol to feel joy in your life. And we haven't challenged those. Those have been conditioned into us our entire lives. Every cultural image of relaxation, of vacation, of, taking a load off and taking a break at the end of the day. It's all alcohol, right? The alcohol industry has done an incredible job of marrying alcohol to almost every positive experience in life, right? There's no occasion where alcohol's not allowed anymore. I mean, it's everywhere. And so that permissiveness is conditioned into us. And so we have to really, where we start is we actually go after those subconscious beliefs and we say, let's pull those out of our subconscious and investigate them. Are they really true? Is it really true that alcohol is going to help lower your stress and anxiety? Well, let's look at it. And so I help them go through the science and we start to understand that actually biochemically, it's raising your cortisol, it's raising your adrenaline, it's depriving you of sleep. And so this information, it takes repeating because this stuff has been conditioned into us for so long. It's almost like a reverse brainwashing we have to go through to be like, wait a minute, let's check this out. And then we replace that belief. Say, what would actually help lower my stress and anxiety? Well, maybe that's a walk around the block. Maybe that's some sunlight in my eyes. Maybe that's snuggling my dog or my kids, getting some oxytocin in our body that actually will help lower your cortisol. And so once we start to kind of replace these beliefs with ones that are factually more true and that better serve us, you can start to kind of chip away at that old pattern, that old habit where I'm reaching for the bottle because I'm stressed. And then I go, oh, wait, this is actually going to raise my anxiety. Maybe I can try something else. And so it's that little moment we're trying to carve into their new pattern in their new brain and say, just all we need is a little bit of space to question it, and then you have room to replace the behavior.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. I'm not the biggest fan of dry January per se, because I think it's followed up by the wettest February ever, unfortunately. So that usually tends to be the case with most people, right? They end up kind of drinking just as much as they would have done in January, in February, based on the fact they feel so limited and all the other things that come from that. However, what I do love about that is, as you said, the opportunity to take a step away from alcohol for potentially the first time in your adult life. And I love that aspect of when I start working with someone as a health and fitness coach, I encourage them to do the first 2 weeks without alcohol, not because of, well, it is going to help their results, but it's not really for that. It's just for them to reflect on their relationship with alcohol. Because again, if I get someone who's 30, 40, 50 years old, then they might have not had a day without alcohol or even a week without alcohol since they were a teenager, right? Which is an insane amount of time to have something that's not actually super, super positive for our bodies on such a regular basis. So it just gives us that opportunity, like you said, that pause to say, okay, well, am I grabbing the glass or is the glass grabbing me? Who has the control here? And I think that's exactly what Dry January gave to you in a sense. So what happened after that?
Well, I failed at it, actually. I was doing it like most people do and just solely relying on willpower, thinking it was only a matter of me depriving myself a certain amount of days, right? It was like a marathon, but I didn't change how I felt about alcohol. I still felt like, oh, I'm missing out, right? Everyone else is getting to enjoy and I can't. And the little bit of shame that creeps in when you start to question, why is this so hard for me? Why is this difficult? It doesn't seem to be difficult for other people. And that it's really just they're living in the dark. They haven't tried to cut alcohol out of their life. Because at the end of the day, alcohol is an addictive substance. Our brains crave it because of the artificial dopamine boost it provides. And so when you cut it out, after it's been habitually part of our life, your brain is missing that dopamine boost. So that craving we experience, not only is there physical cravings in the first 3 or 4 days when you're cutting out alcohol, but then you have all those mental cravings, all of the subconscious beliefs that are telling you why you need to have alcohol in your life. And so that is when you get into the willpower battle where you're like, oh, eventually your subconscious wins out and convinces you to drink. So it was really for me getting new information after I failed Dry January and kind of was bummed on myself. That's when I actually got help. I actually hired a coach. I actually got some new information. I went deep into the Quit Lit. Quit Lit is quit literature. So there is a whole category of books that are designed to help you cut alcohol out of your life. And I listened to This Naked Mind by Annie Grace, and this is actually the program that I am now certified in. And that changed me literally overnight because it was all of the subconscious programming. And I recognized that wow, alcohol is not serving me anymore. And once I was really able to kind of crack open that subconscious, it wasn't easy. but my mindset had been changed about alcohol. I still had to learn how to navigate my whole world alcohol free, which was awkward, endlessly awkward, but I knew I didn't want to drink anymore. And so then it was really about crafting my new life that would be equally as rewarding to my brain. And that's everything I learned since then has been about crafting that life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to go deeper in that in just a moment. But I also want to ask the question. I think another big fear that comes from a lot of people, and not even just a fear, but a reality, is when they cut out alcohol, like you said, they're missing, whether it's artificial or not, but that dopamine boost, that high or that low or whatever it does for you, whatever that is that fills the gap in your life for that moment. And then they're like, well, now I need something else to fill it. So then I go fill it with food, or I fill it with social media, or I fill it with whatever behavior that's actually not serving me long term either. How did you avoid filling the gap that alcohol left with something that wasn't just as unproductive as alcohol was?
Right. No, I didn't. I definitely allowed myself, I would say almost for a year, I replaced it with sugar. I replaced it with carbs. I thought, wow, I'm already doing this really difficult thing of cutting alcohol out. And I did lose quite a bit of weight when I first cut it out. I lost about 15 pounds. But then I did slowly start rewarding myself with the food. And it's so interesting for women. I think this is really a topic that a lot of people are going to be like, oh my gosh, yes, that sounds like me. Is, for women, at some point in our youth, we're taught that food becomes the enemy, right? We are not loving our bodies because we don't look like what we see in the media. We want to be skinnier. And so we start to demonize food. Like, I'm going to try and eat less. I'm not going to eat certain things. I'm not going to eat carbohydrates. And it also happens at a time when we're ripe with insecurities, right? In our teenage years. And then enter alcohol. Alcohol gives us kind of that false confidence. It helps us dull those insecurities. So at some point, it's like almost when food becomes the enemy, alcohol becomes the savior in a way to help us feel more confident. And then, so what I noticed about myself is once I removed alcohol, food came back as being like the new reward for me, but also this complicated relationship with food where it was like, I'm a good girl if I don't eat the carbs and I stay skinny, but I'm bad if I allow myself to have the treat, right? So I recognized that somehow food became the new reward for me, but it was also filled with just so much baggage mentally for me.
Yeah, it's a tough one, and it's an interesting dynamic. I remember helping someone with their health and fitness goals who was smoking at the time, and they're like, should I give up smoking at the exact same time? I'm like, well, obviously I want to improve your health and wellness, but you're actually going to have a much tougher time with your dieting if you give up smoking. Like you said, if you're giving up one addictive substance, then usually your body goes and searches for another. So that's something I think a lot of people need to learn to recognize. And also the alcohol sugars as well that your body has gotten used to too, right? Like especially in the evening, and you take that away along with the alcohol that's in your system, and it's two of those things that are going, it is a real challenge. Now with all the hindsight and clarity that you have, and maybe someone who's going on that, maybe if you were to do that journey today, or if you could go back and tell Elly who started that journey, what would you encourage them to do with their evenings to replace it in a more productive way?
Yeah, this is kind of actually the third layer of my program is in this kind of creating this new life that is equally rewarding. I use a tactic called dopamine stacking. So because nothing is going to provide as big a boost as alcohol or drugs or sugar in that regard, we have to do incremental stacking of smaller behaviors that are going to slowly rise your dopamine, and then it's not going to sharply fall off the same way alcohol does. So I recommend things that hit on all five senses. So we try to find things that are visually stimulating, things that sound, beautiful music, taste. So, dark chocolate is a really powerful thing, things that smell good. I tell my clients to create a little sanctuary for yourself that has things that are hitting on all five of these senses that are going to stimulate your dopamine and start to stack it incrementally. So that's like kind of your sanctuary at night. In the evening, we work on creating morning rituals that are going to nourish your nervous system and really set you up for the day. Because a lot of people think, oh, I'm fine all day until I get to that kind of witching hour, that 5 p.m. witching hour. But what I tell them is back up. It starts first thing in the morning, the way you wake up your body. Are you pounding caffeine and jumping into your phone and opening the door to Pandora's box and everyone else's agenda and, demanding your attention and your time? Or are you carving out space for yourself to really tell your mind and your body that I'm going to love you today. I'm going to nourish you. So we start with like lemon water, and then we start to add small new behaviors through habit stacking. This is a James Clear tactic. And we start to slowly add lemon water. And then we try to get outside and get that morning sunlight in our eyes and movement. So we don't try and do everything all at once. Like you said, it's really impossible to try and quit a lot of bad behaviors all at once. We also don't want to try and start a laundry list of 10 things you need to be checking off every morning. So we add them one by one over time and allow your brain to experience the reward so that your brain is like, oh, this does actually feel good. I crave this now. My brain is now craving this, a morning walks to see the sunrise, than it is to like jump into my phone first thing in the morning.
Yeah, absolutely. And then with the alcohol as well, it's probably the final question I have from this perspective. Did you take more of like a cold turkey approach of like, okay, that's me done with alcohol. I need to remove all of the things that it's doing to me to have this transformation? Or was it kind of a dip the toe in the water approach? It's like, okay, I'll cut down to just 2 nights per week.
Initially, before I got the new information about, how to change my subconscious beliefs, it was attempting to moderate. I was like, okay, I'm not going to drink on the weekdays. I'm only going to drink on the weekends, and I'm only going to drink wine. I'm not going to have hard alcohol. I think everybody goes through that moderation attempt phase because nobody wants to give up alcohol. Nobody wants to silo themselves as potentially somebody who has a quote unquote problem, right? We don't want to look at that. We don't want to think like, why do I have to stop when everyone else gets to continue? And then after I did the work on my subconscious beliefs, it was literally like a light switch that went off. It was like, I don't want to drink anymore. The desire was gone because I didn't believe alcohol was serving me in any way. And so it was fundamentally easier after that point because the desire was gone. There was still 100 triggers a day to drink, and mostly because alcohol's ubiquitous. It's everywhere. You can't avoid it. But because my desire was gone, it was a much easier way for me to navigate it. And it's much more the awkwardness of trying to live alcohol free and dealing with the social world that becomes difficult. But the desire was gone for me. And that's something I can teach people how to do.
Yeah, I can imagine. And maybe we'll touch on that a little bit later because it's a big part of the journey, right? It's one thing to stop it and be able to not have it in the evenings when you're at home. And I hear this from a lot of people as well. It's like, I don't have issues when I'm at home, but I'm more of a social drinker. I can't say no or whatever that might be. And then, that comes from a layer of different challenges they're actually experiencing, which are usually nothing to do with alcohol and everything about how they feel about themselves, ironically. But I'm sure that you see that a lot of that as well. And then obviously you mentioned when you stopped the alcohol initially, you dropped those 15 pounds, which I can imagine is kind of a huge win for you and probably a lot of people who are thinking, okay, well, if I cut out alcohol, I would be happy with losing 15 pounds. You also mentioned that during kind of the peak of your alcohol, your cortisol was all over the place, adrenaline as well, functioning at, well, I would say that even not functioning, but kind of producing at different times of the day, which they probably shouldn't be. How did you get all of that back into order? Was it like take out the alcohol and the hormones like kind of reset themselves and got themselves back to normal? Or was there some work that you had to do there to kind of get things back into a good place after years and years of alcohol consumption?
Yeah. Well, there's a natural resetting that definitely happens once you cut alcohol out, mainly with that cortisol level. But I was 39 when I quit. It was just before my 40th birthday, and I was starting to experience changes hormonally. The same things that worked for me in the past as far as exercise and diet weren't working the same anymore. I was starting to carry more weight around my middle. I was having some problems sleeping. I was also having mental health challenges. I was way more anxious. I was way more quote unquote depressed, even though I would never characterize myself as someone. I thought it was just kind of part of motherhood. And so I recognized like, gosh, I'm going into 40. What is going on hormonally with my body? I had no idea how much alcohol had been impacting my hormone levels. And in a kind of an attempt to learn more about my hormones and how to balance them as I kind of approach this perimenopausal phase of my life, is I started to learn about cycle syncing. And that is essentially using nutrition, exercise, and lifestyle to support yourself hormonally throughout the different phases of your cycle. I had no idea that we really should be eating differently, exercising differently, and practicing different types of self-care to support our hormones at different phases of the month. And that it would actually, you could live in harmony in such a way. Like I always thought, oh my gosh, I need to work out hard all month long. I need to be eating low carb all month long. And this was, sometimes it would work and other times it would backfire on me. And I know a lot of women will experience this. Like what worked for my husband didn't work for me. He was really big into fasting and I would try and fast and sometimes I could do it. And sometimes I would gain weight while fasting. I was like, how is this happening?
Yeah, I could not agree more with that. And I think that there's many times in which we go for this kind of more hardcore approach because that's what we are taught. It's kind of like the alcohol message, right? It's all this one consistent message and there's kind of one size fits all. And that tends to be the way, especially when it comes to selling to women in their 20s and their 30s. It's this super hardcore pound your life with stress approach. And because that's become so familiar in all aspects of our life, we're like, yes, that's exactly what we need, right? I always find that the people with the most stressful lives are the ones who love the high intensity classes, the spin classes, the fasting, all the things that add extra stress and pressure to our bodies. And then, like you said, you approach that age of coming up to 40 where the hormones are going to take some changes. You know, you've got perimenopause, menopause, and postmenopause all to handle, and that can span for some women over the course of a decade as well. So with that being said, a lot of women who are listening today will be approaching that phase of their life. What can happen if they keep drinking in at the same time as going through all of those hormonal changes that are inevitably going to happen?
Yeah, I think this almost needs to be like a public service announcement for most women, is that alcohol it's raising your cortisol, which is going to raise your estrogen, and it's also going to squash your progesterone. So when we raise cortisol, it squashes our progesterone. And as we age, progesterone starts to dip naturally in our 40s. And that creates something called estrogen dominance, which is why we kind of start to suffer in this next decade. Perimenopause is really characterized by suffering for women. You know, I do some digital courses online and I was Googling images for like the course. And if you Google perimenopause, all you get is like women like holding their heads, like looking suffering, you know, depressed, anxious, glasses of wine. The characterization of a woman in her 40s is one of like, she's going crazy, she's gaining weight, she's losing her looks. And if your listeners take one thing away from this episode, it's really that like, you don't have to suffer this decade of your life. And a big key component of that is going to be hormone balance. And the number one thing you can do to balance your hormones at this age is cut alcohol out, because it's raising your estrogen, it's squashing your progesterone. And that delicate ratio is what we are trying to fine tune as we get older. Estrogen dominance is also cancer causing. Right? 8 out of 10 breast cancers are hormone receptor positive. 70% of women diagnosed with breast cancer, it's a hormone receptor positive cancer, meaning it needs estrogen to grow. So not only is alcohol contributing to raising your estrogen, it prevents your liver from detoxing this estrogen out of your body because it's prioritizing detoxing alcohol. So it's like a double whammy for women at this age. And, you know, not to mention it's wrecking our sleep. So we have so many things working against us in this decade, and alcohol is kind of at the top of affecting that cascade of health changes.
Yeah, and I think it's probably one of the most irrelevant as well, right? Like when it comes to the stresses that we might have in our life, maybe we can transition out of our career or whatever that might be, but it's probably going to be there. We can't change the stresses that our kids are potentially going to cause that are going to be natural through parenthood, right? And alcohol is kind of just that layer on top of like, if you were looking for the easiest way to improve your well-being without making any major changes that are going to impact your life in a negative way or like completely turn your life around, it's probably, like you said, top of the pyramid is just taking it off and having such a profound impact as well. But I do understand there's going to be a lot of people kind of screaming at the screen or or at their headphones thinking, Ellie, can I not just keep in a little bit? Like maybe when I want to go out with the girls, or, it's my daughter's birthday party, or whatever that might be. Is there any room for that at all for those type of people?
Of course, everybody has to do this kind of assessment on their own. You have to gauge like how much is it really impacting your life. And, my husband has been on this journey with me for the past 3 years, and he didn't stop, but he has slowly progressed up to the point where he probably only drinks 10% of the time now. But he goes into it eyes wide open. He is aware of the cost to his sleep and to his health. And so he's not under any myths that, hey, this is the only way I can enjoy myself tonight. This is the only way I can connect and have fun. And so if that's where you land with your relationship, that is completely fine, right? It's really about how you feel about it at the end of the day. Like, are you waking up feeling ashamed? Did you not, hold yourself to your goals or the standards you have for your life because of a drink? At the end of the day, it's a beverage, and we're letting it control so much of our lives. And we're saying like, I can't enjoy myself unless I have this thing. When we investigate that belief and you start to debunk it, and this one, you really have to experiment with. I can't just say you can have a lot of fun without alcohol. You actually have to go out and prove that to yourself. And when we were children, we didn't need alcohol to have fun, right? Our joy wasn't living inside a bottle. And somehow along the way, that shifts for us, and it becomes the only way we can socialize and the only way we can have fun. And so I love to kind of prove that to people, like, hey, when you remove alcohol, your entire world opens up, and you start to tap into this old self that had different passions, that had different interests. And your life does change, because you're not going to go sit at a bar for 3 hours, because it's not that fun. You recognize like sitting in one place for 3 hours while people get progressively drunker isn't that fun. So your life opens up. The guardrails and the kind of boundaries that alcohol placed on your life are no longer there. For one, you can drive. You can go anywhere. You can do anything at any hour. You can wake up super early in the morning. And so it really does start to open up, and you're like, wow, I thought this is the only way I could have fun, was this little sliver. And now it's like, I'm doing so many more things. I'm tapped into this intuition that has passions and interests that I haven't really thought about since I was a kid.
I love that, because you said two things there that I particularly grappled with. The first is, it's just a beverage, and you're letting it dictate so much of your life. Imagine if it was like, I don't know, tea. Imagine if you're letting, a cup of tea dictate, how well you slept or how much you enjoyed an evening. It would seem ridiculous, right? It would seem pretty crazy. Yet society allows us to believe that dictates our enjoyment. And the second thing that ties into that is, like you said, coming back to us being children. For some reason, we were able to have all the enjoyment in the world, and debatably a lot more than we have, obviously in different ways, when we were much, much younger without alcohol. But all of a sudden, now it's the crutch in which we can only enjoy ourselves as well. So once you do, like you said, like kind of tackle those beliefs and break them down a little bit, and just really ask yourself the question of like, can I really not enjoy myself without this beverage? Then, that's where it would probably become a little bit more like, well, really? Is that what I'm relying on, right? And the thing that you don't want to go into is shame. And I think that you've mentioned that. It's like, you don't want to be like guilt, like giving yourself a bad time or feeling guilty about it. But I think it's just like coming to terms with the harsh reality of that, and then asking yourself the question ultimately, is that how I want to continue with things? And I trust that once people realize it, I'm sure they don't want to.
Yeah, it's one of the more difficult things to grapple with, but once you do, it opens up your entire world, and you start to explore again. And it's a really exciting phase, because you tap back into that part of yourself that is alive again. Because alcohol, it actually dulls our senses. We often think it enhances an experience, but biochemically, it's a neurotoxin. It's actually taking your prefrontal cortex offline. So you're taking in less of the environment, which is why details get fuzzy. It's why we black out. And, a lot of people will say, oh, but I love to pair my wine with a really good meal. Alcohol technically dulls your taste buds. A lot of these things are myths, and they're so subconsciously programmed into us that we've never really questioned them. A lot of your listeners will get a kick out of, there's a wine study they did where they took like the cheapest $2 wine and all the way up to like the finest wine you could buy, and they brown bagged everything, and they did a taste test. more people preferred the cheap wine. So these people, they're like, oh, but I really love the taste of wine. And it's like, no, you love what the wine does to your brain chemistry. And then we start to make this association with like going to wineries and the status and the beauty and artisan of the winemaking and things like that. But it's like, well, it's also just a drug that your brain is now craving.
Yeah, and I have the same thing with people who tell me, "Oh, but Elliot, I'm a foodie." I'm like, well, if you really appreciate the flavors of food that much, you wouldn't need to have it in excess, right? And that's the true connoisseurs and the like 1% of people who maybe really truly appreciate the body of a wine or whatever it is. I don't even know the terminology personally. Those people don't need an enormous amount. You don't see them getting drunk, right? They're really not consuming a bunch of alcohol in that sense. And the same with food, same with anything really. And it's, if you really do appreciate those things, then again, that's another belief to tackle, right? Then why does it need to be in excess? And I think that that's something that's really important to reflect on. Like you said, it's just all these beliefs that we've been fed by society and which we've continued to feed ourselves with. And it's just about breaking those down and really coming to terms with that. So I really like that perspective. So obviously the middle-aged woman prescription right now is to, continue drinking, allow that to solve many of your problems, be a little bit sleep deprived, nothing wrong with that. Go to these high intensity classes, kind of eat your feelings away, all these, terrible things that unfortunately most of the middle-aged women that I know will end up engaging in at one point and another. So if you were to give the ideal prescription that's not this kind of typical prescription that we've been fed and kind of delivered to take, what would that look like comparatively?
One of the things I'm teaching now is this cycle syncing approach, and it allows women to kind of approach their relationship with food and their relationship with alcohol in a completely different way, because the goal of cycle syncing isn't to be skinny. It isn't to fit some sort of ideal. And I did a whole podcast episode on this and why I think cycle syncing is superior to traditional dieting. And it's because of the mindset. We're not looking at ourselves and saying something's wrong with you because you're 10 pounds heavier and you need to lose that weight. We're saying, I want to mentally feel more stable. I want to be able to age well and gracefully. The end goal is hormonal balance, not to be skinny. And so when you shift the end goal like that, it kind of removes the shame, as if you're not hitting it perfectly, it's okay. It's a moving target. Our hormones are fluctuating all month long. And so we are just trying to get better at living in sync with that hormone balance. And so cycle syncing is also, you go in and out of phases. So there's a 10-day phase at the beginning of your cycle, days 1 through 10, which are an ideal time for intermittent fasting, low carbohydrate eating. Estrogen is on the rise at this time. And so we support estrogen with like cruciferous veggies to help detox it out of our bodies. There's a whole art to it. And it's really about loving yourself. It's really about working with your body instead of traditional dieting, which is about like, I'm going to punish you by starving you of food. I'm going to deprive you by not letting you have carbohydrates. And then I'm going to use exercise as this kind of whip to like get you into shape, So this is a complete departure from that mental, work. And it is so much more about loving yourself. And that's when you start to truly see cycle syncing as more of like a love language and getting back in touch with what your body really needs. Alcohol does not meet any of that. It naturally is going to fall away because you're like, oh my gosh, this is destroying my hormonal health, my sleep, my mental health. And it becomes much easier to approach changing your relationship to alcohol than versus saying, hey, you need to stop because you have a problem.
Yeah, I like that, coming from a loving place versus a punishment, essentially. However, I know many people are going to say, well, I would love to treat myself in a loving way, but I'd still like to drop those 10 to 20 pounds. Is that going to be something I can do at the same time? Do I have to have different expectations now? Are things a little bit slower? Do I need to take my mindset away from the scales, but can I do that while simultaneously still improving my body composition?
100%. Yeah. And I don't think women, myself included, will ever lose this urge to want to drop weight, right? But cycle syncing really does promote that because so much of it is about managing your blood sugar and managing your insulin. And so there are different phases in the month where you are leaning into more of this intermittent fasting, low carbohydrate lifestyle. But then there's phases, particularly when we're boosting progesterone, the 8 days before our period, when we go into hormone feasting. And this is where you nurture your body with nature's carbohydrates. Sorry, no pizza, no French fries, but we lean into more carbohydrate. Your blood sugar is naturally going to be higher during this phase of your cycle because it's trying to produce progesterone. And so what a mistake a lot of women make is these hardcore exercisers, and I was one of them, these hardcore dieters, is we were starving our body of that progesterone. Progesterone needs carbohydrate. It needs glucose. So when it's depleted and then we're adding the stress of the workout or the stress of our lives, it's exacerbating that estrogen dominance. And that's where women suffer. That's where we suffer from all these things that we all chalk up to PMS, bloating, fatigue, headaches, sore boobs, heavy periods, all of that we've been thinking is a given in life as women. It actually can be remedied by hormone balance. I love to brag about this because I've been cycle syncing for over a year. My last 5 cycles, I have gone into symptom free. Like I didn't rage out on anybody, which is my family's thanking me. No, most women will know this. Like there's a few days where you're just like, stay out of my way. I am actually like, I've managed that. I don't have sore boobs. I'm not bloated. I didn't have a big like overeating episode. And so this to me is progress. I'm not measuring anything. I'm not doing any hormonal like blood work testing. I'm doing it based on how I feel and based on my symptoms. And that's what cycle syncing has really allowed me to do is my relationship is so much healthier with my body. I'm maintaining my weight. And I'm not punishing myself with food and exercise anymore.
Yeah, it's powerful. And I think that you've just got to recognize that all of those things are going to be conducive with improving your body composition as well, right? If there's no place for alcohol in your lifestyle, if you're eating the right foods for your body, you're going through those fasting periods and the low carb periods, but then cycling those with getting good healthy carbohydrates in, but also honoring your body's needs, then, it's inevitable that body composition improvement is going to happen. This is the thing, you're giving yourself the best chance of making that happen. However, if you're going to continue to be sleep deprived, you're going to continue to do the super high intensity exercise, you're continuing to layer alcohol and probably some binge eating on the weekend on top of that, then you're not even giving yourself that opportunity. And then obviously the contrast is then to do all the hardcore things to then try and get yourself in shape. And it's kind of this endless cycle and this endless balance. So yeah, I like that perspective. You're just giving yourself the best opportunity to improve, and no one needs to see your blood work. At the end of the day, the blood work means nothing if at the end, like if you're able to communicate with your family in the most, harmonious way during those cycles of the month. That's what it comes down to. It comes down to life quality, how you feel within yourself and how you feel when you look in the mirror. It doesn't matter what a blood test will say for you, right? It really comes down to like, how do you want to feel at the end of the day? And if you can feel massively better, not even just marginally, but hugely better, then I think that that's a win for everyone.
100%. The mental health piece is so key because when you are mentally sound, you're right. You're not beating yourself up. You're not going into those low places where you might use food or alcohol to cope. It all starts at the top. Our hormone health is really we talked about this pyramid at the top of our health. It affects every system in our body. Estrogen in particular has over 400 jobs in the female body. And when it starts to dip later in life is when women experience a ton of health problems. And so supporting our hormonal health should be priority number 1. And both of those start with cutting alcohol and getting sleep, because those are both going to affect your cortisol and your insulin, which are sitting at the top of the hormone pyramid and are going to affect every other system in your body so dramatically. And that's really why I love cycle syncing, is because the goal isn't about being skinny, but side note, it kind of always is. But when you are taking care of these things, it will naturally happen in a way that's much more sustainable mentally for you, because you are taking care of yourself and you're loving yourself. It's not about this ideal that we're trying to meet because we've been fed it our whole lives to be skinny, young, and beautiful.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And it's been a super insightful conversation. I'm sure a lot of listeners, specifically the females listening today, are going to take so much away from this. And I do want to wrap up with a final couple of questions, Elly. The first is, what impact do you want to have on the world with the work that you do?
I said this earlier, but it's like my public service announcement. And I feel a bit like an activist now, that I want to shout it from the rooftops that women don't have to suffer this next decade or 15 years of their life, that you can feel good, you can age gracefully, you don't have to, surrender and just say like, well, there's nothing I can do. You can really take agency over this next phase of your life and live it beautifully and be connected to the people in your life in a completely different way. We don't have to fit that stereotype of the frazzled, unhinged woman in her 40s.
I love that. And where is the best place for people to find you if they want to keep up the work that you're doing and see an inspiration of the non-frazzled woman going through this process?
Yeah. So my website is www.findmyselffree.com. And I offer a number of different kind of coaching programs there. But I would love for your listeners to get my free resource, which is just a hormone balancing checklist. This is kind of going to open up their eyes to just some really basic things you can do to start hormone balancing. And it's free on my website. And they can also check me out at my podcast, which is just called Find Myself Free, the podcast. And I do a lot on releasing alcohol as well as hormone balancing there.
Amazing. We'll put those links in the show notes below. But Elly, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a fascinating conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Elly. It's been an honor. I appreciate your time today.
And that was the Simply Fit podcast. I hope you gained a huge amount of value from today's episode. I feel inspired to improve your health and well-being. Be sure to search for Simply Fit in Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify, or anywhere else you get your podcasts from. And go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Also, if you like the episode, please don't forget to give it a 5-star rating. I'd love to hear your feedback or any questions you have. So reach out to me on social media. You'll find me on Facebook and Instagram at Elliot Hassoun. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to talking with you all on the next one.